So it was in September 2019. That's when the State Capture Commission heard evidence from former SABC employees who later formed part of the SABC 8 on alleged editorial censorship at the public broadcaster. The inquiry's report recommends that law enforcement conduct further investigations into former SABC CEO, that's Lulama Mokhobo, as well as Hlaudi Motsoeneng. The commission has also completed its work, with its chair, Zondo, handing over the final volumes, as it were, to President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday. So let's unpack this aspect of the findings and bring in Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki, who is one of the SABC 8 employees who testified at the commission, who joins us now in our studio for her thoughts of where we are in a context where many people are saying it's the end of an era in some respects. But I want to take a few steps back. Thandeka, welcome, by the way. Good morning.
Thank you
so much for honoring our invitation. It was in September 2019 when you were in the hot seat at the Zondo Commission. Take us back to that moment of your testimony and what you were hoping South Africans would know most about what you wanted to say.
Well, first of all, thank you and good morning to your viewers, and thanks for having me. Today is the morning after the night before.
Yeah.
And today, in some parts of the country, it has dawned very cold and snowy. And it's a blank new canvas that we as society, South African society, have been given by Justice Zondo to seek again. I know that many in our country are looking to the state to bring about justice, to prosecute. And yes, I do believe that prosecutions must ensue and that the law enforcement agencies must investigate further, prosecute, and accountability, and people must go to jail for their wrongdoing. I also believe that it's not just the duty of the state to take a step back and act on Zondo's recommendations. I believe that it is for all of us as citizens to look at the report and to find action points.
Right.
And for us to become active citizens in the pursuit of justice, so that never and never again do we meet such a scourge. Because the scourge wasn't just punishing in that it weakened the institutions of justice and it weakened the institutions in South Africa, but it was pernicious. It set back society a number of years. For example, the capture of the SABC, which was threefold. You'll remember that Zondo heard testimony as to the attempt to capture the national narrative,
right,
and to bend it towards making the SABC the mouthpiece of a faction of the ruling party. And that was done by mainly the capture house that was led and run by the Guptas. But there were other capture houses and other kinds of capture involved. Secondly, there was the policy capture and the regulatory capture that we heard in the testimony of particularly Yunus Karim, perpetuated by MultiChoice, and that sought to derail the public broadcaster and the public broadcasting system from becoming digitized and going digital, where we would have realized a multiplicity of benefits for the nation. For example, we would have fanned out into a number of channels which would have enabled us to bring broadcasting services like public broadcasting in indigenous languages. Imagine having a whole channel to sign. Sign, whether you're signing SASL, which is South African Sign Languages, which is the new latest official language, or whether you're signing in indigenous sign languages. We would have been able to reach the people who are hard of hearing, yeah, and the people who are elderly who have become hard of hearing. Imagine if we had a channel through which we could have saved the education system, which went through devastation during the COVID period. Instead, we could not put school on TV like CCTV or the Italians did, right, because we had not gone digital. So that capture had a multiplicity of pernicious effects, not just on the balance sheet of the SABC, which could not realize sufficient revenue on the analog signal. Because, by the way, the analog signal chowed up the bailouts. It costs close to $1 billion a year to keep that analog signal. So to be detained by a monopoly in pay TV, to rest in the analog signal while it's bleeding our balance sheet, there should be reparative action there. Then
Absolutely.
there was Busasa.
Right, right. Before we get there, I mean, we obviously are still taking stock, really, of the real effects, and I think we're going to do that for the next couple of years. One era has ended. I'm sure many will agree. Another has begun. And you spoke about action points that emerge from this report. Part of what Raymond Zondo is recommending is a statutory offense to be established that will deal through severe penalties with those who are found to have abused their power. And this is, I guess, perhaps right in line with your own plight at the SABC as being part of the SABC 8. A big part of what you guys were pushing back against was editorial interference. Names that come up at the time is Hlaudi Motsoeneng and corruption. And there was a real cost to that. Do you think something like this kind of recommendation, would undo that damage in some respects and prevent similar things from taking place?
I concur with the Chief Justice that there should be a statutory penalty and some kind of additional statutory body that looks into the way the SABC functions to ensure beyond its board, and the way the board is chosen through Parliament in a very political process.
Right.
So if you are going to have a body that is independent, that operates almost like a Chapter 9, that sees to it that the SABC is actually independent and impartial and can never be used either to drain it of its resources and finances by either a corporate body or a political body or a state body. And also, I think a statutory body would help in ensuring that the SABC remains faithful to its mandate and doesn't embark on mandate drift, which has happened in the past, even in the recent past, and becomes a public broadcaster, which is a public asset. And it's important to remember that this mandate is to ensure universal access to the airwaves, so that whether you are poor, whether you can access news in English or not, whether you are able to reach and understand politics, you can use the information as a developmental tool to help communities and citizens to realize a better life. So the dream of Zwelakhe Sisulu in building a true public broadcaster, as it's universally defined, and as UNESCO defines public broadcasting as a developmental tool for a people, it should never, ever be derailed or plundered again. And that statutory body would help us realize that.
Yeah, and you've already touched on this, but there's a lot of calls now to insulate institutions like the SABC from any kind of political meddling. The sentiment that was expressed by the chair, Mr. Makhathini, is that the depoliticization of this institution is of paramount importance. But many are quick to point out that, that might come across as disingenuous, given the allegations he faced, in some respects, in carrying out some of the mandates, as it were, from factions in politics that have their own interests.
I am most concerned. I entertain grave worries and concerns about what occurred recently, where there was apparently serious evidence that the head of news, who should be able to have unfettered determination as to what the news of the day was leaned upon. She should not be leaned upon, or he should not be leaned upon by political bodies, by the board, or even by commercial interests.
This is Patiso Makopeni, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know that this is a complex story, but I do believe that the board was not in any position to try itself and acquit itself.
As far as you're concerned, how much, if anything, has changed, given the concern you've just raised?
I think that a lot would have changed if the current administration had taken to heart the need to fully implement the recommendations of the ad hoc committee, but that wasn't to be. And I think a lot would have changed if the current administration was truly committed to defending the newsroom from interference.
Sure.
And also defending whistleblowers, rather than embarking on a a bludgeoning exercise to get rid of dissent.
Do you think that's still happening?
I have my concerns.
All right. It would be a huge injustice for us not to speak about Suna Venter. She was part of the SABC 8. Sadly, she passed on 2017, you'll remind me, if June the 29th, I think it was. And a lot of what led to her demise, even according to her family, was the trauma and stress that was caused essentially by activism, part of being part of the SABC 8. I mean, in what ways do you reckon those who have an interest can pay tribute to someone like her?
Those who have an interest can join me and others in arguing and fighting for a private member's bill that we are in the process of arguing for, to protect whistleblowers. And I am happy you spoke to Cynthia Stimple, because whistleblowers get harassed. The disciplinary hearings inside the organization get weaponized against them. They become sham exercises, and it becomes an exercise is truth is what I call truth, because I am in a position to abuse my power. And the harassment of Suna was twofold. You know, Justice Zondo in the Busasa report explained how exactly Busasa was involved with other journalists in the harassment of other journalists. So Busasa used journalists, even in the SABC newsroom, to harass Suna Venter through burner phones, through a campaign to just vilify us. For example, the false accusations that we had taken money from Busasa, whereas people in the newsroom and beyond had arranged for Hlaudi Motsoeneng's legal fees due to our lawyers to be paid by Busasa. So we were subject to multiple capture at the SABC, capture by Busasa, regulatory policy capture by MultiChoice, as well as capture from those forces that brought on the Gupta interests into the broadcasting house.
Sure.
Never, never again. And we must forever remember Suna's suffering and join people who are embarking on this petition to fight for the rights of whistleblowers, to get whistleblower law out of the labor relations sphere of our law into the human rights sphere of our law, and so that retaliatory action is criminalized and the current PDA is utterly overhauled.
Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki, thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us. So much said, so much more to be said, and hopefully we'll create the spaces for those conversations to take place. But for now, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki is a former editor at the SABC, today a scholar and academic at Rhodes University.